All right, everyone. I'm going to show you guys. And so we've talked about like the Ray interactor where you can use your cursor or, your controller here to point at something. I'm going to show you guys a new, excuse me, type of interactor. This didn't exist in the last version, so I'm kind of new to it, but it's called the gaze interactor. And what it does, like its name sounds like, it allows you to interact with something by gazing at it, aka looking at it. Okay. So in other words, you looking at something counts as a hover, or you can look at something for X amount of time to select something. So you can kind of think how this could be interesting. You could use it to, like, if the character looked into a mirror for a certain amount of time, you could have an action occur, or you could even just have people like looking at something to turn buttons on and off or something. You could probably think of some interesting ways to kind of play around with this. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this. All right, so this is exercise 7, and I already have kind of a rig here. Now, this rig does not have it doesn't have a Ray interactor like we normally have. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into choose the camera offset, and let's do a child. We're going to do, I'm going to go to game object XR. And we're going to do the gaze interactor. Okay, and I want that to be kind of a child of the camera offset. And that will add in this gaze interactor script, which we'll get to in a little bit. It also will add in the sorting group. There's two more components I want to add. One is called the gaze input manager. Guess what that does? It handles the gaze, or where your character is looking at. And the other one is we're going to add another tracked pose driver. Okay. Just like how we did this for the Ray interactor, the difference is this time we're tracking the head so that we can use that information for the gaze interactor, okay, for the gaze input manager. And what I'm going to do here is we're going to set this to following the eyesight of the player through the head mounted display, okay, the headset. So I'm going to go under input here. So I switched these from action to reference, and we're just going to use the input, and I'm going to put in eye position. Did I spell it right? Probably not. And I'm going to use XRI eye gaze position for the position input. And for the rotation, let's do that again. This time I'm going to use XRI head eye gaze rotation. And for tracking state input, I'm going to put in eye tracking state. Okay. So the point of this is that this is going to track your eyes in the Oculus Quest and use that information with the interactor, basically. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, now that we've done that, I'm going to go into the gaze interactor, double check that it's set to everything, which means the gaze can interact with any interactable object in your scene. And the other thing we want to do is we're going to go under selection configuration. Okay. And what I'm going to do is we're going to say allow hover to activate. What that does is it allows you to look at something to act as a hover. So if something has a hover state, we can activate it by just looking at it with the gaze interactor. If you're wondering how this really works, see this blue line that's coming from the gaze interactor. So essentially, whatever that line touches counts as a interaction. Okay, it's kind of like using the Ray interactor. The difference is rather than moving your headset or moving your controllers, it's based on your headset time. Okay, we're also going to choose hover to select. Okay, so since there's no buttons like on the controller, the way that we select with gaze is we just basically stare at something long enough. And then what that will do is if you stare at it long enough, that counts as a select. And I'm going to say, why don't we make it like 2 seconds? Okay. So if I stare at something that has a gaze interactor on it, that counts as a selection. Okay. Auto deselect means basically it'll deselect itself after a certain amount of time. It usually defaults to like a half second, but I'm going to put it like 3 seconds. Okay. So me looking at an object that has the gaze interactor set up on it for 2 seconds counts as a selection. And then if I look away from that object for about 3 seconds, that counts as a deselect. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to go under the simple interactable. And the main thing that we want to do is we want to go under. So this is, what I've done is I've said, okay, if someone hovers over this cube, this purple cube, change it from purple to red. And then if someone stops hovering, go back to the purple. What we're going to do is under gaze configuration, I'm going to say allow gaze interaction. Okay. So what that means is if it's a hover, me looking at it now counts as a hover. Okay. What I'm going to do here to the this key here is this key also has a XR simple interactable applied to it. And we are going to turn on allow gaze interaction and then allow gaze select. Okay, make sure that is turned on. Okay. So what I've done here is so what I've already done is there's this treasure chest right above it, which I've turned off. And what I've done is I've set up a select that if you look at the key and you select it with your gaze, you're going to be turning on that treasure chest. And then when you look off of the treasure chest for 3 seconds, that is going to undo the set active, which is going to turn off that object. Okay. So in other words, looking at the object will make the treasure chest appear, and not looking at it will make it disappear. Okay. Here's something I want to show you where this might come in handy as like kind of like a real world scenario. So like here I have this television. Okay. And what this television is I've set up a little screen, which is basically just like a material. It's called TV show on or off. Sorry. Okay, you see that right there. And what I'm going to do is when I look at the TV, I want to change the screen from the default to this other one, which looks like it's just a photograph of a cartoon from the 90s that was one of the first 3D generated animations called Reboot. And so by looking at it, I want to quote unquote like turn the TV on, if that makes sense. Okay. So here's what we've done. On this TV, there's a simple interactable. There's also a collider. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, let's turn on the object. Let's just say for the sake of argument, normally maybe it takes like, let's just say for the sake of argument, I really wanted, instead of just looking at it really quickly, I want someone to have to stare at it for a little bit. So I'm going to turn on the interaction and the select. And what I might do is say override gaze time. What that means is like whatever you have set here as your default. So here it's set to under gaze configuration. We've set it to 2 seconds. What this means is that 2 seconds is the default time of how long it takes to count as a select. Let's just say for the sake of argument for this one, I want to make it 5 seconds. Okay. I'm going to override that and say, okay, instead of using the normal 2, why don't we make it 5? Okay. And if you look away, I just wanted to turn off really quickly. So normally override auto deselect, normally it takes 3 seconds. Why don't we make it like 1 second? Okay. All right. So I've now made my objects interactable with the gaze interactor, which means if I were to run this in the, save and build it in the headset, we could look at it. The reason why this is a little difficult is sometimes it's hard to tell like where you need to place your head, so to speak, to make something trigger. So I'm going to show you guys a little trick that I came up with that might help. So here's the camera, here's the gaze interactor. You see the little blue line that's shooting out. So this blue line has to intersect with one of these. Now it's hard to tell, this line is invisible. So how can we tell? What I've done is I made like a little, what I would suggest doing is putting like a little, like a circle, like a cube or like a sphere to represent where the eye is looking. So I'm going to make a sphere and I'm just going to make it like really, really small. I'm just going to shrink it down. Maybe I'll make it like, I don't know, red or something or green. And I'm going to make, I'll call this sphere, eye line, so I know where the line is. And I'm going to make that a subset of the gaze interactor. So to click on that, so see where the line is. What I'm going to try to do is I want to match this up. And actually, it's a little bit off here. There you go. So this should be actually in line. See how it's like right in line with the gaze interactor? What I'm actually going to do is let's shrink this down some more. And I'm going to move it along the sort of axis here. Just the sphere. And the idea here is like, see how the sphere, that kind of represents where the head is looking, okay? And so you can kind of point that little object around and that would let you sort of know where you're looking at. Now, a better way to do this, or a more sophisticated way, is I actually made a little script, or not script, a model called Crosshair, which looks like a little crosshair on a gun or something. So I'm going to do the same thing here that I did with the eye line. So I'm going to get rid of this and you can kind of see it here. I'm going to rotate it so it's facing the camera. And oops. And let's make that green. So I'm going to make the material. Oops, I thought I tilted this. There we go. Let's shrink this down. And once again, I'm just going to kind of push this along. I'm going to make this green. All right, so see that little symbol there? So when I try this out, that I can use that as like a reference point. So when I look at something, I kind of hover that over this or this or this, and my gaze interactor should work, okay? So I know that was a lot, but try that out. Set up your gaze, make sure you've set up the, make sure that your pose tracker is set up. That information is going to go here, which then controls this. Make sure on all your objects that whether it's a select, an interactable or a grabbable, make sure that gaze interaction is turned on. And if you're trying to use the select option, make sure that the select option is turned on. Okay.